Good afternoon, everyone. This is Brianne Eby. I am a policy analyst at the Eno Center for Transportation. Welcome to the latest in our series of Eno webinars. Today we present the final 50 feet, challenges and opportunities in urban freight. As cities grow in population and consumer demand increases, how can businesses that are competing for street space in congested urban environments meet customer expectations for quick deliveries? The University of Washington's Urban Freight Lab at the Supply Chain, Transportation, and Logistics Center is examining this question and testing new solutions in urban goods delivery. The lab is pilot testing low-cost and high-value actions to optimize operations of the final 50 feet of the urban goods delivery system, which is defined as the supply chain segments that begin when trucks pull into a parking space and stop moving. Some examples of this are public load and unload spaces at the curb or in an alley, or in a building's loading dock or internal freight bay. This work tracks the delivery process inside buildings and ends where the consumer takes receipt of their goods. The lab's project researchers are specifically looking at methods to reduce dwell time and failed first deliveries. Here to explain some of the lab's research, we're joined today by Barb Ivanov, the director of the Urban Freight Lab. Barb will tell us more about the Urban Freight Lab's applied research, which is conducted with partners from the public and private sectors. After her presentation, we'll have plenty of time for questions. For those who are listening in, you are encouraged to submit questions and comments through the questions function on the webinar website. You don't have to wait until the speakers are done to submit questions. You can do this at any time. Thank you all again for taking the time to join us today. And with that, take it away, Barb.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful day. And it's a pleasure to talk to your audience. The Eno Center for Transportation apparently has a very wide audience because I've been hearing from folks all over the world saying, hey, I hear you're talking. I want to share the newest findings in the Final 50 Feet suite of research projects from our Urban Freight Lab. So you guys are going to get the latest and the greatest as we proceed through this talk. We know that the growth of e-commerce as well as ride-hailing services is reshaping how parking is managed, how it's used in dense urban areas. Well, we're not going to just admire the problem today. We're going to talk about, again, research findings that document some promising solutions. With that, let's drive through. First of all, remember that e-commerce sales continue to grow. They have, in fact, grown 15% every year for the last 11 years. And if you talk to people who are knowledgeable about Amazon, although they don't disclose their retail versus their cloud-based services, total revenues separately, I understand that they may have even grown by more than 30% on the retail side last year. So enormous growth. And as you know, if you order food or prepared groceries or prepared food online, there's a whole new market that is going to experience, again, increased rapid growth in the food sector online. So more growth to come. While that's going on, we also have the ride-hailing growth. So I'm going to tag back to all of this and remind us that a 20% e-commerce annual growth rate will double the volume of deliveries in just 5 years, right? So whether it's the 15 to 16% we've already experienced, or as I said, maybe at the upper end, some of the pure play online firms like Amazon growing even more rapidly, is your city ready, if nothing else changes, for potentially doubling the number of truck trips in your downtown core? Okay, back to growth as well in on-demand passenger service, whether it's Uber or Lyft or smaller firms out there. We know that in Lyft's growth cycle, they almost doubled the number of people from 2016 to 17 that took a Lyft. Uber completed 4 billion rides globally in 2017. So rapid growing, huge demand, again, primarily for curb space, but I've seen them, and maybe you have too, stopping in a through lane or sort of stopping in an alley or stopping in a open air parking lot. to pick up as well as drop off folks. There is not enough curb capacity now. We've conducted curb parking utilization studies, and I'm going to talk extensively about what's going on in the city of Seattle. And one of which indicated that over 90% occupancy rates are happening in commercial vehicle load zones, some areas of the city for much of the workday. And this shot is one of my favorites because it points out that even when a truck, in this case Cisco's food, predominantly food delivery truck, is parked legally, its rear load gate extends out into one of the busiest crosswalks in downtown Seattle. So all of this activity has impacts that are beyond just the commercial vehicle load zone space itself. Who and what is the Urban Freight Lab? Well, we're a virtual lab. We do not have Bunsen burners. We do not have a building on campus here at University of Washington. However, we're based in the Civil and Environmental Engineering College, and we work very closely with the City of Seattle's Department of Transportation. I want to give some snaps to them every chance I can because the people we work with there, unlike other cities, and New York City might be one example where we just ban things. We ban all delivery trucks in Midtown Manhattan during peak hours of the day, and I guess now there'll also be some constraints on the ride-hailing services ability to grow. But whether it's New York or South Florida, you hear mayors talking about the fact that they're going to solve problems through enforcement. And that's a really different approach than we've experienced here in Seattle, where they're saying, no, we recognize that our city life depends on deliveries, whether it's, components for manufactured parts, or again, my dinner that's coming in an Uber Eats vehicle. All of those things make the city work. We use a systems engineering approach, and I want to emphasize that because you're going to hear throughout this work that as a industrial systems engineer would, we always look at the entire system end to end. And that is a little bit different from a typical traffic engineering frame of reference where you're considering strictly the horizontal network, right? The arterials in the streetscape or the highways in your town or your region. We also look at the entire, again, end to end. So we examine what goes on within urban towers in all those floors, the vertical space, the vertical trips that delivery people also make in a downtown core. Our current members, and there are 6 of them, Charlie's Produce is a West Coast-based firm, pretty self-explanatory name, wholesaler of all kinds of great produce. The Ford Motor Company, Kroger, which has various brand names throughout the country, again, huge grocery chain, Nordstrom, UPS, and USPS. And I want to say they not only provide funds for the lab, but almost even more importantly, although I do like the funds, they are willing to send senior executives here to the University of Washington about 5 times a year in one-day sessions to deliberate and make decisions about the direction of our work. And we could not advance without that kind of expertise and background. They're just fantastic. So actually my colleague at Eno did a pretty good short description of what is the final 50 feet. It starts where a truck driver stops. Whenever they park in a load unload space, again, that could be at a curb, it could be in a private loading bay or loading dock, it could be in an alley if your city has alleys. It includes everything they do as they maneuver the goods over curbs, along sidewalks, through intersections, and it doesn't end until the customer takes receipt of delivery. There are 2 goals, and these did not come from my brain. They came from our members, again, the companies that are providing us with both executive funding and technical support, as well as the City of Seattle. So goal number one is to reduce the amount of time that truck actually parks in a load-unload space. What are the benefits of that? Well, number one, the delivery firms can do their work faster, right? And maybe they'll lower costs to their customers, but certainly there is a private sector benefit. But there's a big public sector benefit as well. The only way to get more productivity out of these spaces is to find means and methods so that companies can do their delivery work faster. Again, we talked about you can ticket them to try to change their behavior, but if it takes that delivery person an hour to do their work, going door to door, floor to floor inside of an urban tower, then it takes them an hour and they'll have to accept the ticket, right? But it doesn't change their behavior. We're going to talk about how new strategies actually can turn these spaces even faster. The second goal is to reduce the number of failed first delivery attempts. So this photo shows a very sad situation where just before Christmas, this is at an apartment building in my local area, residents were waiting for Christmas presents to arrive. And instead of the convenient online shopping experience that they wanted, they got a sticker. And the sticker says, guess what? You don't get a present. You have to go find this alternative location. You have to get in your car and drive there and pick it up. So I've just ruined that retailer's brand experience for the shopper. We've also been told by our members that up to 15% of all first delivery attempts fail. That's a lot when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of truck trips in a major city. That's not true in all areas. Probably it's closer to 2 to 3% in many, but in some places, this is a really big factor to additional traffic congestion. So that's nice. We've got a problem. Let's stop admiring that problem and move on to what do we need to do to actually create innovative solutions. Our first step is to GIS map and measure the complete load-unload space infrastructure. Now, Seattle, like most cities, had a geospatial database 2 years ago in 2016 of only one component of this load-unload space network, and that was the commercial vehicle load zones at the curb. They came to us and said, in fact, and working with them, we helped suggest there are two other elements that we need to map and measure. Number one, all of the privately owned loading docks and bays that could be under a building or right next to it. And in Seattle, we still have an alley network. It's like the back entrance to a lot of these buildings. The city had no current and certainly no current GIS data layer, that is, and they also had no measurements of the truck envelope through these alleys. We defined the three elements of the network as, and I'm going from left to right, curb parking spaces, which most people are quite familiar with, our alley network, as well again as those private loading bays that are underground typically. Seattle is the first city to have completed this, and this shot gives you a picture of our greater downtown area, which includes the sort of shopping district, financial district, Amazon's campus in South Lake Union, and more. The key findings of the survey of these loading bays and docks privately owned is that there is a great reliance upon public space. 87% of all of these buildings rely solely on deliveries from the curb and potentially from an alley. When we did this research, we found that I hear a lot of talk in our profession, transportation professionals, about we can't get data from private firms. I think we found in this case and in many others in working with private firms that if there is a specific project that will provide value to that firm as well as others, they are quite happy to engage with us. What UPS did in this case is come alongside our data collection analysis group, our team of grad students, and they reviewed all of the loading bay sites where the door was closed. So clearly when we were out surveying, we had no idea if that was a loading bay for a truck or if it was a passenger vehicle garage. This review allowed us to rule out 90% of these locations behind closed doors. It reduced our uncertainty to almost 40% down to less than 1%. So it was a tremendous contribution, and we're most grateful to UPS in that case. Let's talk about the alley infrastructure. There are alleys still in many major US cities, not only Seattle, but Chicago has almost a block-to-block ratio of alleys and others. They're originally built to provide access to the back of buildings. I think of the old British TV show Upstairs, Downstairs. Well, this is the downstairs, guys. This is where the servants, the electricians, the plumbers, the folks, again, delivering goods, where they were able to enter without going through the main door on the main street. A key finding of our research is that in Seattle Center City, way more than 90% of these alleys are only one lane wide. That was not known to us, it was not known to the city, but it has very important operational implications for commercial vehicle delivery. Because of this, when you look at an alley, which can be 250, 350 feet long, you might think, wow, I could pack 7 or 8 trucks in there. And that's a great alternative to the lack of curb space. Well, no, it's not, because they cannot pass by each other. They're really limited, each alley block, to no more than 1, maybe 2 trucks at a time. So as they can't line up and then back up into the street, that's illegal and unsafe. Again, operationally, this width condition drives very limited capacity in our alleys. Okay, I'm going to share a little bit about an occupancy study done at the alley level. Key findings here is that we studied 7 alleys. 68%, we looked at every vehicle that entered and parked in those alleys, were only there 15 minutes or less, right? That's really an interesting finding. And when we combine that with the fact that we've only got space in the alley for 1 or 2 vehicles of any sort to park at a time without obstructing the entire alley, it shows that the most productive way to run an alley is to keep that time slot at as short as possible. Currently, most of the alleys in Seattle are 30-minute time slots, but we're showing that for many of the vehicles currently parked there, you could run a 15-minute time slot. Okay, I'm going to share a little bit more about the whole load-unload space network in a commercial vehicle curb occupancy study that we also completed. And in this, number 1 key finding is, because we observed what commercial vehicles did throughout the curb and what all vehicles did within commercial vehicle load zones, we're able to tell you that I know my friends in trucking often like to complain about the number of passenger vehicles that end up in a commercial vehicle load zone, but in fact, what's going on is that the drivers of both passenger and commercial vehicles are using these 2 authorized space types almost interchangeably, very fluidly. You can see in the chart on the left that over half of all vehicles in the commercial vehicle load zones were passenger cars. But of that group, half of those were only there for 5 minutes. So very short-term use again. If you look at the chart on the right, you see that about a quarter of all the commercial vehicle load zones, commercial vehicles actually parked in passenger load zones. Again, very short occupancy there. This chart is quite data complete. There's a lot here for you to chew on at a later date. I know our slides will be posted, but I want to draw to your attention to a couple of points. You see at the bottom row here where the different types of vehicles parked by time. So we see that over half, 53.8%, of all these commercial vehicles were in all spaces at the curb less than 15 minutes, 15 minutes or less. My next point, if you're looking down there, if you add up 53.8 and 18.4, you see that nearly 3/4 of all the commercial vehicles, about 72%, were there 30 minutes or less. So again, you're seeing documented evidence that most of this parking is very short term. However, there is a group, 28% of commercial vehicles that parked more than 30 minutes. And again, half of those, of that amount, actually were there, about 14% were there more than an hour. So we don't want to put those commercial vehicles that are there more than 30 minutes, more than an hour in an alley. We want to prohibit that use in an alley. Put them out at the curb where they can get in and out quickly without obstructing other vehicles. Oh dear. Our third finding from this curb occupancy study is that 41% of all the commercial vehicles in these curbs were parking in unauthorized locations. That includes passenger load zones, but it also includes parking in bus lanes, near fire hydrants, in the through lane, in the turn lane. That's a very high percentage. What this chart draws your eye to is the fact that on the left you see in our study areas Four Seasons Hotel, which is certainly a hotel, but also in a very lively retail district. If you've been to the Pike Place Market, it's really close to that area. The Westlake Center is the heart of a shopping district in Seattle. Both of those have a lot of retail, and you see they have indeed a very high amount of parking in unauthorized location, the highest, 65 and 55%. Sorry, I'm just trying to scroll on. Okay, give me a little bit of patience. For some reason, I'm not scrolling. I'm just gonna see if I can make that happen. There we go. Okay, after we have learned a lot about actually GIS mapping, measuring, looking at the operations that are driven by the infrastructure at the curb, in the alleys, and in private loading bays, we began to prepare goods trip reduction strategies that focus on tools that a building developer or manager can implement that will significantly change the amount of dwell time and the number of failed first deliveries. So one of those strategies is installing common carrier locker systems. There are many distribution nodes actually within buildings that gain delivery density. I'm going to talk a lot more about that. Seattle's building code group is also looking at requiring developers to provide loading bays in any new building. And again, using integrated technologies, having sensors in these spaces to more actively manage and increase the productivity of all of them. Okay, we ran a pilot test of a common carrier locker system within the Seattle Municipal Tower this last spring. We wanted to test whether creating this delivery density in a smart locker system actually could achieve our goals. And we wanted to really test whether the business models of all the parties that need to come to the table would be supported by this kind of a common carrier locker effort. It turns out they are a promising solution. Those are my colleagues at SDOT and myself next to the pilot common carrier locker. They can reduce urban congestion as well as that truck dwell time because they create this artificial delivery density. So trucks can deliver many packages at one stop, the driver can hop back in the truck and get on about their business. In our definition, common carrier means that any retailer can use it. That's not obviously the case if you use an Amazon locker. You ordered that from Amazon. But in our case, whatever retail you purchase from, they may also be delivered their products into a common carrier locker. So what were the results of the pilot test? Before, we found that on average, UPS drivers, from the time they parked in the loading bay and made their deliveries, floor to floor, door to door in that building, on average, it took them 27 minutes. Okay, that's our before condition. After we installed the common carrier locker, we found that the delivery person took 78% less time to do their work in the building than before. This is a proof of concept. It was a pilot test. I don't want you to think that we have vast data about these movements, because we don't. It was a short-term pilot test, but as proof of concept, it provides evidence that this really can make a significant difference in reducing, again, the amount of truck dwell time in any parking space, so that that parking space becomes much more productive. In the greater Seattle area, our two transit agencies are considering actually placing common carrier lockers at commuter train stations and bus stations. This strategy could also support their mobility hub efforts. So providing amenities that make ridership even more pleasant experience than it is now. So we were commissioned by these two transit agencies, Sound Transit, King County Metro Transit, and the City Department of Transportation, to create evaluation criteria. And you can see we developed and prioritized 9 that can be used to determine which sites will really work for this kind of a solution and which, frankly, won't. We applied that criteria. We located at least 5 feasible sites. There are many others. One example is right again in the heart of the downtown shopping district. You see Nordstrom's entrance is to the right, and to the left is the train station, train and bus currently, but it will be train only shortly, Westlake Station. It's a super valuable asset. Look at that. It's almost like a big living room right there, and it's completely empty. You take an escalator to the left to go down into the train station itself, but that would be an ideal place to set up common carrier lockers, convenient for transit users as well as folks who work and actually reside in the downtown core. If you've got any questions, I'd be glad to answer those right now. If you want to actually read in more detail about the final 50 suite of research reports, that website is provided for you. Thanks again so much for your time.
All right, thanks, Barb. We've had a number of questions come in already. Just to conserve time, I'm going to try to bundle these up where I can. So a few people have asked about what kind of planning is needed for the future of self-driving vehicles, but I'm also wondering how that extends to potentially drones or other modes of transportation. We've heard about, pilots with UPS, thinking about delivering with bikes in dense urban cores. So how would we, incorporate other modes?
Sure. So number one, with drones, that's a very specialized use in urban areas. In the near term, that's going to be more about medical emergency situations. You can't replace the volume of truck and the cargo space of truck with drones. However, this kind of mapping effort is critical to moving towards conditions where AV vehicles, not only those that are operating on arterials and streets, but those that are doing the final 50 feet. I've seen some interesting robots that traverse sidewalks or climb stairs, again, as far as prototypes. So this work is measuring and mapping is absolutely critical to that.
Okay. Somebody else was wondering about the user perception of common carrier locker systems. I think this is also maybe related to concerns potentially of, tenants living or working in buildings, maybe potential security risks. So thinking about things like, possible terrorist attacks. What do you find were the kind of perceptions of the locker systems?
Yeah, well, we're not the U.S. Mail, we're not UPS, and there are protocols, but what I really want to focus on is I was going to say for, very bad guys sending stuff through the mails. That's not something that I am very knowledgeable about, but we do know a lot about from surveying potential users here, especially Sound Transit users, that the number one reason they would consider using these lockers located in public areas is security itself. We talked a lot about the fact that when I come to pick up my parcel at my location, whether it's at my office or even more likely my residence, there is a probability in some places that it was stolen. There's a group called Porch Pirates that actually follow UPS or FedEx drivers throughout their route and just pick everything up that they just set down in residential areas. I actually have a colleague who works for Google, offices in New York City, and she's got an entire game plan for where to get her parcels to go because every single thing delivered to her apartment building is stolen. What she does is she actually shops on a variety of retail sites, and then she goes to Amazon to make the final purchase because they have lockers and these other guys don't. Lockers can be a huge competitive advantage for retailers.
Okay. Also wondering about how you might deal with delivery trucks that are willing to absorb a ticket to conduct their business in a curb loading zone. And then another question sort of related to that was the role of potentially metering a curb loading zone to create induced turnover.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat myself and say, they accept them as a cost of doing business because they don't have an alternative path. In fact, if a city system was well designed, right, we wouldn't be encouraging more unauthorized parking. We would find a system that allows people to do their work without engaging in illegal behavior. So what we're saying is let's look at the entire system, including the buildings. The building manager, the building developer, in the case of these locker systems, is the one who sets up the entire policy, the protocol, and the operation that allows that truck to get in and out of the public or private parking space faster. So you could meter them, you can ticket them, you can do all kinds of stuff that is unpleasant to a worker who's driving and delivering. But if you don't change the way these buildings are managed, that actually reduces the amount of time it takes them to do their work, you haven't achieved anything that affects their behavior, right? So if you want things to run more fast on the street, in the city-controlled portion, you need to work with the building managers and the building owners, and again, in the future, with building developers.
Okay, great. And then we'll sneak in one final question here before we have to close out. So this is asking about the partnerships with the private sector. So how specifically do you work with the private sector partners to show that there's value in their participation?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, as I said earlier, they're the ones who set our goals, our research goals. So we don't tell them our project is to do X. We listen to them, and we certainly, as researchers, are the ones who design the project. But the goals come from the companies who have decided they want to become members. So that's critical. We also only ask for their time, their in-person or online time, when we have a decision that needs to be made, right? So we don't, we do our best not to waste their time. If they can read it on their own, if it's background information, that all goes in a pre-read package. When you're in the room, you're not there just to hear me talk. You're there because we need you to make a choice between a variety of alternatives that drive the research forward to the next stage.
To subscribe to Transportation Weekly, which is an invaluable resource on all aspects of transportation policy and practice. Once again, thank you for your participation and have a great afternoon.